Welcome to Houston Newsmakers EXTRA. We've been talking with Dr. Paul Brace, a political science professor, Rice University, talking about democracy, how it may have been impacted by what took place January 6th of last year. Dr. Brace, we're talking about some of the impacts that have been taking place afterward, and you've pointed out what's been going on the state level. A lot of the things that, right, because the state levels do draw districts, but they've also put in some laws into place in some of those states that may make it more challenging to vote, or it puts partisan people in positions where, up to this point, nonpartisans have been kind of watching over the democratic voting process. All of that's happened as a result of what was going on up to and through January 6th. Has it not? The, quote, big lie that they're talking about, and that how much is that going to hurt democracy long term or short term?
Well, I mean, there are two things going on here. One is to make voting more difficult, and voter ID laws and challenging mail-in voting and other measures taken in selected states arguably make it harder for working people, people without a lot of free time, to go to the polls. And this can affect the outcome at the margins. And so you have that problem going on. The other thing that's going on is the efforts to install ideologically compatible individuals in positions who help regulate the conduct of elections in the states. And states do, historically and constitutionally, regulate our elections. There is no national election regulation. It's all done at the state level. And there's mounting evidence that efforts have been made to install persons who would be more sympathetic to a challenge to an electoral outcome. We saw in Georgia, notably, the president actually calling, I believe it's their Secretary of State there, who was actually a fellow partisan, and telling him to find 11,000 votes, I think was the number. Don't hold me accountable to the specific number. But the idea was that a partisan might be able to change the outcome of the election. To his absolute credit, that Secretary of State, profile and courage, wouldn't do it. And but we can imagine in other states there might be partisan ideologues with more compatible interests who would succumb to pressure from the leader of the party and perhaps alter the outcome of the election.
All right, I'm going to let you go ahead and put that back in your ear. And
Sure.
I want to ask you this other question here. As we look at what took place in Georgia and other places, democracy as it's supposed to work, in fact, held together. It did work ultimately, certainly messy, but it worked. Going forward, it looks like it's going to be a challenge to see democracy working again well, if it ever has worked well. What is your thought about how democracy and how it works in our country is going to do going forward?
Well, I mean, on one level, and this isn't really what was going on at the states, but we also know there was an effort to put pressure on Vice President Mike Pence. And to show you how tenuous our democracy's status was, Dan Quayle, a much maligned vice president under George H.W. Bush, is also from Indiana. And Pence, former Vice President Mike Pence, turned to this much maligned vice president for advice. And Dan Quayle, to his absolute credit, perhaps is one of the biggest heroes in recent memory, because he advised the vice president, you cannot do this. It would be wrong. And Mike Pence accepted that guidance. But if you don't believe our democracy is hanging by a thread, think of that. A vice president who was never given much credit is advising a seated vice president who also, I don't think, was given a lot of credit. And his unwillingness to go along with this plan to interfere with the counting of the ballots may be what ultimately saved our democracy, but also seems to be what fomented the riot, because they were not getting their way on that day that the ballots were to be counted.
So why should I be, and I'm an eternal optimist, by the way, but why should I be optimistic about how our democracy is going to work going forward based upon all that has happened and what you're telling me now? I'm feeling a little bit down about what the possibilities are for us to have things work like they're supposed to work.
Well, I mean, I applaud your optimism, and it's founded on over 200 years of strong norms supporting democratic processes. But I would hate to ruin your day, but there are rising powers in the United States that don't seem to subscribe to these longstanding norms, and they're challenging elections based on complete falsehood. There's no evidence that there was any widespread fraud in any of the elections based on all analyses. Yet the broadband is devoted to perpetuating this is amazing, and there are many people who believe it. And the people who were storming the Capitol that day believe it, and they still believe it. And there are still many people in the United States who think the election was stolen. And as long as that persists, and there are people in place in state legislatures and in state governments, there's a very real risk that the next election outcome will be challenged and disallowed, and new electors will be substituted. And we may have a president whose selection is genuinely suspect going forward, and I think that would be a very difficult thing for America, having witnessed what we've seen over the last 6 years.
So bottom line is strap in, buckle up, be ready for, and hopefully be a soldier to try to find truth. That sounds to me like the best way we can get through this and push forward. Dr. Brace, thank you for your input, I think, for your truth. I'm glad to have that, sir. I appreciate you.
Have a good day.
Houston Newsmakers Extra. Share it with everybody you know.